Okay, we've got a decent number of participants now, so I think I'll kick off, and people will obviously sort of come and go during the course of this. So just wanted to say, firstly, hello everybody, welcome. My name's Turley. I'm the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. I used to be the MP for Redcar between 2015 and 2019, but it's my great honour to be chair of this excellent organisation. The Labour Movement for Europe is a socialist society that is here to formulate and promote the European ideals, really, amongst the Labour movement. Obviously, we've had a rough few years, and our values and our purpose has taken a bit of a beating. But I think for all of us, although we are where we are, we lost the referendum and the subsequent battles that have ensued since. I think for many of us, we know that our values about openness, tolerance, partnership, working across boundaries are those that are shared by the European Union. And in the long term, we want to maintain close cooperation, close friendship with them, and know that we share so much in common with our European friends and neighbours. We want to work within the local party to keep the flame alive, as it were, of friendship and cooperation with our partners over the channel. So it gives me great pleasure to do this Zoom meeting today on what is the online Labour Conference Women's Day. And we thought it'd be really important to have a session about Brexit and how Brexit is going to affect women's rights. And I think on a day when we're probably all reflecting on the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I'm proud to be wearing my badge of today, a terrific feminist and a real icon, who said, "Women belong in all the places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception." And I think many of us have felt during the process of Brexit that there's been a lot of men's voices dominating. There's been a lot of machismo, and actually, you know, women are probably going to face a lot of the consequences of Brexit, whether that's around our long cherished rights that we've fought very hard for, around discrimination. But also given the economic impact, we know that women are often very, have already been hardest hit by austerity and insecure work. And so we're very concerned about the impacts of what Brexit means on top of the pandemic that we're all witnessing, which had huge implications for women. So I'm delighted we've got a great panel of speakers for you today. And the process, how this will work is that the speakers will speak themselves for about 6 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Now, I'm not a tech whiz, and you have to bear with me because this is the first Zoom meeting that I've chaired. But basically, we'd ask you to, if you want to ask a question, instead of writing it into the chat, if you could simply virtually raise your hands. And I think to do that, there should be a button labelled "Raise Hand" on the right side of your screen. And then it will list all the people who've raised their hands. So I'll then take you in turns, and I'll probably do a sort of a few batches of those. So so without further ado then, we'll move to our first speaker, and I'm really delighted to welcome Theresa Griffin. She's been an MEP and represented us over there in Brussels, and sadly one of the people that we lost. She was chair of the Labour parliamentary group there, and will be known to many of you as well as somebody who's standing to be on the NEC. So we wish her well, and Theresa, over to you. I need to think, do I unmute you or do you? Here we go, I ask you to unmute. Bear with me, everybody. Has that worked? I might have to ask Harry to assist if this isn't working. Harry, can you assist me here? I'm pressing ask to unmute, but Theresa, it doesn't seem to. Oh, there you go. We have you. Excellent. Sorry, everybody. Thank you very much. Over to you, Theresa.
Okay, wonderful to see you all, sisters. And obviously, as we know from the trade union research, trade unions such as Unison, they're actually worried that the greatest austerity impacts of Brexit are actually going to be on low-paid part-time women. The legislation that we passed in the European Parliament, for instance, we enshrined fighting energy poverty for the first time in European law. We do not know whether that will actually be adhered to after Brexit. in terms of copyright. We fought against the large platforms to ensure that creative workers could be properly remunerated for their work. Again, will that happen after Brexit? We don't know. In the European plenary this week, we actually, sorry, our colleagues, I keep saying we, apologies, our colleagues passed the fact that CO2 emissions should be cut by 55% by 2030, and we all want to be part of actually creating a clean, green environment for our children. Will we be part of that legislation? Born in the European Parliament, the right for a woman to return to her job after pregnancy and for her job to be held open for her. Just before the referendum, I walked into a meeting in the European Parliament and a Tory MEP was saying that the best thing about coming out of the European Union would be that we can get rid of all of this unnecessary health and safety legislation. Health and safety legislation born in the European Parliament. And sisters, as socialists, we believe that every worker has got the right to leave her home in the morning with the expectation that she can come home safe to her family at night. The CE mark that you see on toys that you buy for your children, your nieces, your nephews, your grandchildren, again, legislation, standards born in the European Parliament. Equal pay for work of equal value. We think about that a lot today with the sad passing of our sister. Barbara Castle was the MEP who actually fought for equal pay for work of equal value. Again, legislation born in the European Parliament. And Anna, and it's great to see you all, by the way, Anna said at the beginning that our social and democratic family right across Europe still want us to be involved, and they do. Literally, up until the 30th of January, we would meet a colleague in the European Parliament who would say, we want you to remain. So it's really important that we keep those links with our sisters right across the social and democratic movement, the Party of European Socialists, because they want us to stay involved. It's been my privilege during this pandemic to actually do quite a few Zooms with colleagues from the S&D, the Greens, even the EPP, and at the end, all of them are still asking for British voices in terms of European policy. It was a privilege to represent my region of 7.4 million people with Julie in the European Parliament. We have to keep those ties with the sisterhood going, and we have to make sure that all legislation that we can is gender and climate proof. And that's actually where we got to in the S&D, that all trade deals, for instance, should be gender proofed, should be equality proofed, should be climate proofed. I actually can't see, sadly, Anna, this Tory and this Brexit shambles actually doing the same. And I'll finish on this if I may. I'm first generation Irish, and there are 30,000 people that cross the border, so-called border, between Ireland and Northern Ireland every day to shop, to study, to visit, to see family and friends. One of the most precious things we have achieved collectively is the Good Friday Agreement. As part of the GFA, there are 13 cross-border health services, which means that, God forbid, if you fall ill, you get taken to the nearest health facility for you. It doesn't matter which side of the border you are on. We have to retain this. We have to protect the GFA. It's great to see you, sisters. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Theresa. That was incredibly powerful, and I think sort of the message of solidarity it's quite heartbreaking. I'm sure, you know, women across Europe have probably been watching what's been happening in this country with horror, and I think it's so important that we get that sense of sort of solidarity, and we continue with all of our joint working as far as we can. So so thank you very much. That idea of gender proofing, I think, is so powerful and so important. But looking at this government, as you say, it's just a struggle to see that being anywhere close. And I don't know if any of you saw the image that we saw of Boris and Dominic Cummings, and, you know, basically so many of the people that are leading the pandemic response, all men. And, you know, unfortunately, this is where we are. We've got a huge fight on our hands. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to now hand over to the fantastic Tulip Siddiq. It was my privilege to serve with Tulip in Parliament. She's been the MP for Hampstead and Kilburn since 2015, and she is now our Shadow Minister for Early Years. And I'm just, forgive me, I'm looking at the technology again about, here we go, how to unmute her. But Tulip's been a fantastic advocate for you know, pro-European kind of partnership and cooperation, and has done terrific work on issues like equal pay as well. So I'm very proud to welcome her to speak. Is the technology going to work this time? I'm asking. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I think we're there. Over to you, Tulip.
Okay. Thanks, Anna. And I think I speak on behalf of all my colleagues when I say that we miss you dearly in Parliament. And we always remember a Tory MP once standing up and saying you were the nicest person in the Palace of Westminster. We always remember that. So coming from a Tory, I think that was high praise. And to say thank you to the Labour Movement for Europe for organising this event, and to everyone who's joining us on the call. It is a pity that we can't see all of you in the same room, but at least we're doing something virtually. And the other sessions that I've done before this, there was a lot said about how women who weren't able to travel to other cities are now able to join our conference. So there are, you know, highlights and silver linings and everything. It's no secret that I think Brexit is a disaster for this country. As Anna said, I represent Hampstead and Kilburn, where 76% of my constituents voted to remain. I also have 22,000 EU nationals living in my constituency, one of the highest in the country. And I know that so many people on this call did absolutely everything they could to try and stop Brexit, and that the former MEPs who are also speaking today worked tirelessly to make the case for our place within the European Union for so many years. I did everything I could within Parliament as an MP, from resigning my front bench position to voting against triggering Article 50, to delaying the birth of my child, to voting against Theresa May's Brexit deal. So I did go all the way, but in the end, we haven't managed to do this. But part of the reason why I pursued this cause so passionately is because I know personally how damaging Brexit could be for women. And as I see it, there are two key threats here. First, it's the threat of the economic damage from Brexit, which we all know will disproportionately affect women. And the second is the threat to gender equality legislation once the protective legal floor the EU offered disappears. And Theresa already picked on this a little bit and has touched on it, but I'll elaborate a bit further. My personal view is that any form of Brexit is damaging to our economy. There's obviously a world of difference between leaving the EU while retaining full access to the single market and leaving the transition period without any trade deal at all. And the former puts us in a worse economic position than we would have been within the UK. The latter is absolutely catastrophic, as you can imagine. Either way, women are going to lose out. We're more likely to have jobs in the public sector and use public services, both of which will be massively hit if the Tories bring in another round of austerity, which inevitably they will. We know that 86% of the spending cuts from 2010 to 2017 were cuts to spending on women. We've already seen in this pandemic that women, particularly younger women who are likely to work in sectors like retail, were much more likely to get furloughed or to lose their jobs. The trend is likely to continue, and it will get worse. And it's up to us as a Labour Party to make sure we are the voices for these young women and for women across the country. After years of being paid nearly 20% less than men across the board, not to mention having pension payouts which are 40% less than men, and a range of other financial disadvantages, women are on average poorer than men. They're also more likely to take on responsibility for buying food and managing household budgets, especially in less economically socioeconomic families. A falling pound and any tariffs placed on food from the EU will drive up food prices, and this will hit women hardest. And the same goes for shortages of medicine and other consumer goods that women rely on. And that's just the economic threat. The threat to women's rights is just as significant, and again, Theresa picked on this. So many women's rights in this country derive from EU law. Since we joined, the EU has been guided progress towards gender equality in the UK at key moments, whether that's on equal pay on the treatment of women facing domestic violence or other threats. So often the British government, usually under the Tories, has had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, to accept some of these initiatives, and it's taken the enforcement of an international court to hold them to account. And there is sadly a real danger that this progress could now stall or start to reverse. Not only are we decoupled from some of the initiatives towards greater gender equality that the EU has been championing, including on unpaid care work, parental leave, and violence against women and girls, that some of the legal safeguards women have enjoyed for years are now exposed completely. And I know when Anna was in Parliament, she spoke a lot about these legal safeguards for women, and it's something that worries me, but also worries me that the government has complete disregard for. Within the EU, as many of you will be aware, women could rely on the direct, effective EU law in the UK to enforce the right to equal pay for equal work. That safeguard is now gone, and as are key legal protections against human trafficking, 70% of which is of women and girls. A whole range of women's rights with regard to paid leave for maternity and antenatal appointments, dismissal during pregnancy, health and safety, and much more are less secure as a result of Brexit. And the enforcement of these rights through the European Court of Justice will also disappear. The truth is that under any other government, even some of the Tory governments of the last decade, I would not be so worried about women's rights being repealed. However, I have absolute zero confidence that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings can be trusted on this. Anna's already spoken about that photo, which we've all seen, but we already know what Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings think about women's rights. And we've seen just in these last 2 weeks how ready they are to copy the Trump playbook of flouting international norms and turn the clock back on social progress in order to appease a narrow base. I'm worried that these deeply reckless Tories will see Brexit as an opportunity to water down rights they see as getting in their way, or at least use the fact that they can't be taken to the ECJ to avoid accountability. I'll finish by saying we have a big fight on our hands to make sure that this does not happen, and we have to fight for the best possible deal for women. You don't have to be in Parliament to fight this. You can be a campaigner in your constituency, you can work in the public sector, you can really be anywhere to raise your voice, contact your MP, and make the case for women. So I'll leave it there and hand back to Anna. And just to say again, Anna, we miss you in Parliament. We hope to see you back there at some point.
Oh, thank you, Tulip. That was absolutely brilliant. And I think, you know, if it's okay with you as well, I think I'd like to perhaps ask if we can share that speech in a blog or something, because I think we need to really get that more widely. It's just terrifying, the sort of the threat that we face. And so I'm really grateful for you for setting that out with us today. And I'm just very glad that you're there in Parliament to fight for women and to fight for our post-Brexit future. So thank you very much for coming today. I'm sorry you've got to dash off for something else. But
sorry, I've got another Zoom, as you can imagine, Anna, but I really wanted to join this because it's a cause so close to my heart. But you've got some other fantastic panelists, so you'll be fine.
We're much appreciated. Take care. Thank you again.
Thanks.
So again, I'm going to now try and see if I can use this technology to unleash the brilliant Jackie Jones. Here we go. Ask to unmute. Great. I think so. Jackie Jones is a former Welsh MEP. She's also a professor of law, and she led for us in the European Parliament on issues of women's equality. So no one better to speak to us today. Jackie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Anna. Thanks everyone who's already spoken, and Harry in the background for organising this as well. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today. I've started my clock, so I'm hoping to stay with 6 minutes. As a former lecturer, you can talk for hours. I want to draw your attention to this report that Hannah Mansour wrote with Mary Honeyball. It's Women and Brexit, and it details in great detail about 100 pages of negative effects, really, on women because of Brexit. It also talks about no deal Brexit in there as well. So it talks about economic consequences, all manner of things. So I'm not going to be talking about this, but this is freely available online. All you've got to do is go online and do Brexit, womenandbrexit.com. all one word, and you can get it downloaded there. There's also an executive summary if you don't want to read 100 pages before you go to bed or something. But my comments I'd like to make are in about 3 different spheres. I'd like to talk about law because obviously that's my specialism, and I concentrated on women's rights, not just in the European Parliament, but also in my career, 26 years of lectures. And the past week, and especially with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as you mentioned, Anna, passing last night, we have a very difficult, or we're at a crossroads again, in the rules-based system of international law and domestic law. And I wanted to just highlight a few things that intersect with European law and how they affect women in particular. So generally for the EU, there are rights that are derived by the treaties, and that's like the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. And if you haven't read it, it's very similar to the European Convention on Human Rights, but it's up to date. So you have very much wider rights that we're coming out of. And that's a big blow. You have the treaties that talk about in 1957 onwards about equal pay. Without that, we wouldn't have it, I don't think, in our legislation. And it wouldn't be in the format that it is. Why? Because we've got rights that are derived from the European Court of Justice. And that's the interpretation of treaties and secondary legislation, which have expanded the rights of women throughout the EU, throughout Europe. And it's also through action plans and strategies. Now, yesterday, the EU launched its race action plan as well. And it's one of our former assistants, Priscilla, who's working on this. And it's fantastic to see British influence still, you know, albeit reduced in the European Parliament and in the Commission. The secondary legislation is vast when it comes to gender equality or equality in general, and it touches every single sphere. And that's the thing about it. It may sound like it doesn't apply to women at all, but it all does. So for example, you have access to supply of goods and services. There's equal treatment for men and women there. In employment, of course, working time directive, very much women's issue. Pregnant women, of course, maternity rights, paternity rights, part-time workers. Now, the ECJ has also passed many different judgments, for example, Defren talking about equal pay, but also about pensions. And it may be surprising to some people who are younger to know that part-time workers weren't allowed to be part of pension schemes until the European Court of Justice had a ruling and said, yes, you must not discriminate against part-time workers. So it's expanded the rights tremendously for women, part-time workers in particular. So how does all of this intersect with what we've seen in the last week? So with the internal market bill and the rule of law and the intersection with international law. These are symbiotic relationships, all of this. So we've got domestic law, we've got EU law, we've got regional law. So for example, the Council of Europe, and we've got international law at the UN level, for example, or the ILO level. All of those things work together and they influence each other. We were part of a bloc of 28 countries that went to the UN and talked about women's rights in one voice, with one voice, progressing abortion rights, reproductive health and social rights, keeping the line on United Nations language to influence other countries who have fewer or were trying to take women's rights away. We're no longer part of that EU bloc, which is a huge blow to a lot of women as far as I'm concerned. And I've been involved with what is called CSW, Commission on the State of the Women, since 2010, so I've seen it firsthand. That's really problematic for women. And in this country, we do not have a national mechanism for women's rights. The WNC used to be it, we don't have that anymore. You'll have to keep me on time because I hope my timer is still working. So that's the other thing. So it's not just for us in the UK and workers' rights and no deal here, it's also for others because we were an example. We were upholding the rule of law and women's rights across the globe. And of course, we've got the Foreign Office and the Department of Development merging into one, and that's really problematic. And I think Labour should take that up and really push on it. I know some Labour MPs have already, but I suspect that their budget is going to be cut tremendously, and that really affects women and girls across the globe. And finally, future directions. Ruth Bader Ginsburg always said that you have to make alliances, and sometimes you have to work with people you didn't expect to. Now, the devolved administrations are a key part of this conversation, in my view, because equality is devolved. Equality looks different in all the 4 nations of the UK. And we have in Wales, where I'm sat at the moment, we've got the socio-economic duty in Section 1 of the Equality Act 2010 coming online in March 2021, which I think is also the case for Scotland, is also talking about it. These things matter because we have to incorporate rights into our domestic legislation and make them effective. In other words, we need international treaties also to be incorporated into domestic law. For example, ILO Convention 190, which talks about sexual harassment in the workplace, or CEDAW, which is the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Put that into domestic law. And I'll finish with this, because I'm out of time now. Women don't use law enough, in my view. I would say that, I'm a lawyer, but we have to use it now, otherwise it'll be gone. You know, Gina Miller is a classic example of pushing the law forward and using every mechanism possible, legally, lawfully, in order to retain our rights and to push forward our rights. So we really must use law a lot more than we do. So I urge you all to do that. Thank you very much for your time. It's fantastic being on this panel. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. That was absolutely fascinating and a lot of food for thought there. I think you're absolutely right, the point you ended on about the importance of the law. I never thought that we'd been in a country where democracy really is under threat and populism is, you know, is just driving so much, and that we could just so easily flout our international obligations. And I think the law is increasingly going to be our only backstop for dealing with the sort of cowboys, frankly, that are running the country at the moment. So that's incredibly powerful. And I think you also gave us a huge reminder of our global responsibilities and the role that we used to play as part of upholding rights around the world, and that without being part of a wider community to drive that, our power is much weakened. So I found that fascinating. Thank you so much. Moving on, next up we have Neena Gill. I'm delighted to introduce Neena to speak. She was an MEP for 16 years, so she certainly knows the EU inside out, and I'm proud to say that she was the first female Asian MEP in the European Parliament, which is fantastic, and she was, while there, our spokesperson on foreign affairs and human rights. So I am delighted to hand over, if I can get the technology to work, to Neena. Take it away, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anna, and hello everybody. It's great to meet you virtually. I just want to say it's wonderful to see so many of my colleagues again. It's been kind of quite a long break, but it's wonderful to follow Jackie and her brilliant presentation. And I just wanted to underscore one point that Jackie made about the hard-fought rights. You know, I think we have to remember that Labour women were quite often at the forefront of achieving these rights over 40 years. So especially internationally, the emphasis on, you know, getting women's rights put into all the EU development programs were down to people like Glenys Kinnock and others, you know, who played a significant part in getting these embedded into EU treaties. So it is really with a lot of sadness, you know, I'm here now. And of course, in my mind, there's little doubt that, you know, we already are seeing major negative effects of Brexit. And of course, these are disproportionately experienced by women. Now, I want to try and look at the public service sector because, you know, I think it's a crucial area for the economic impact of Brexit. And really the effect it's has on women, because in the public services sector, you know, these are largely female dominated, and it's where you had many EU workers and BAME women. You know, these sectors have been surviving on the back of those particular groups. And I want to try and focus on 2 points. One is the social care point, and secondly, BAME women particularly, and how they are impacted. And I was also a spokesperson for the EPLP on the financial services sector. And if I have time, Anna, I will try and touch upon that as well. But I think social care provision is recognised as one of the biggest challenges that's facing our country at the moment. And I'm really pleased with the work that Angela Rayner is doing and that Labour is rightly highlighting during this virtual conference. I think, you know, I mean, most of us and others have widely acknowledged that Brexit has had a significant impact on the health and social care sectors, not just now since January, but really you've seen a drip effect since the referendum. And, you know, my concern is that the impact is going to triple post the 31st of December. You know, experience and lots of data shows that we've already seen exodus of EU staff from the NHS because they were concerned about their future in a post-Brexit economy. And this trend is going to continue. I mean, I have lots of anecdotal evidence. I mean, I've been caring for my elderly 89-year-old mother since 31st of January. So I've had a lot of interaction with care workers and the health service. And many of them are actually saying that apart from not feeling wanted in this country and the level of abuse they've taken over the last 4 years, that there are economic reasons like the diminishing value of the pound. So we quite often don't realize that, you know, many of them was supporting large families back in the countries of origin. And as the value of the pound goes down, people decide, right, okay, you know, I'm going to go, if it's similar level to the Euros, I'll go and work in the Eurozone. But the Department of Health's own analysis last year said, you know, in a worst case scenario, which is no deal, which looks highly likely now, you know, that if EU migrants are prevented from coming into the UK, we will see a shortfall of 6,000 doctors, 12,000 nurses, 28,000 care staff. And that's in the first 5 years. These are their estimates, and I think they're probably quite conservative in terms of the numbers. And at the same time, we see a shrinking welfare state. And, you know, we know that women carry out an average of 60% of unpaid care work. And I know Tulip has mentioned this on perhaps either earlier or in one of the other seminars she was doing. And so there is more and more focus that women have to do housework. You know, it's an expectation. And I would say, like others have quoted, our experience of Brexiters in the European Parliament, you know, most of them were very anti-equality and very anti-feminist, and really feel that women need to fulfill these roles. So we will see a real impact in terms of trying to reinforce traditional ideas about gender roles. And I think, as I said, those of us involved in caring for the elderly, you know, elderly parent, we're experiencing firsthand how limited the social care provisions are after you look at all the cuts of the last 10 years. And there is no way we are really stepping up or preparing for the aging demographic changes that we're going to have in UK post-Brexit, you know. And I mean, I think the message has kind of been driven home by COVID, you know, and you look at their recent announcements and they are like, you know, putting plaster on these things. It's just beggars belief as to how this need is going to be met. And it's so acute. I'm going to very quickly, and I move on to my second point, which was really about BAME women. Now, we know with Brexit, immigration was cited as a main reason by many for voting to leave the EU, right? And I know, and many of us know, that it was really not limited to European migration. This was a veil, you know, that this is about European migration. Because, you know, we experienced, and that's me and my team in Birmingham, and across the West Midlands, which I represented, you know, where we really felt there was an increase straight after, I would say within days of the referendum results. My assistants walking down in Sandwell to go and get a sandwich, people were coming up to them and saying, "What are you still doing here? You know, haven't you gone back yet?" And, you know, I remember one of them, because they had never experienced, she said, I was born in Sandwell General Hospital, you know, where am I going to go? But it was really quite hard for the generation who's second, third generation, you know, to experience this. And I think, you know, I mean, I personally set up a group, which was a cross-party group, which was to work with EU citizens and BAME communities to start looking at hate crime, which really the statistics really weren't recording the level of crime we were seeing in parts of West Midlands, unfortunately one of the highest vote leave areas. So I think, you know, these things are not just racial issues, they're not just religious issues. It is really important we see them as gender issue, because it is women who are wearing a hijab or a niqab who are frequently targeted, and you know, some of it is motivated by Islamophobia, hate crimes, but quite often, you know, I came across other women, other BAME women who were, you know, perceived to be Muslim, and they were targeted too. Now the police does not have those figures and does not differentiate in any way. So I think the point I want to make is that austerity really weakened our society and weakened the welfare state. But the greatest impact of this is quite often on marginalised BAME communities who are, you know, often in jobs or reliant on the welfare state. So, you know, the agenda from Tories is quite clear. They want to weaken the employment rights, which again, we've heard about. And, but I do believe that this weakening of EU regulation will have disproportionate impact on BAME women. And if we have no deal at the end of transition, where many of the women, including a large proportion against BAME women, are in part-time or temporary workers and are more likely to be living in poverty than men are. So I feel that we have to address this issue and not just park it. And very, very quickly, I just want to say about the financial services sector, because often it's something that we don't feel too passionately about, but almost 400,000 women work in the financial services sector. 100,000 of them are working part-time there. And as you're seeing many of the financial services sector having to move jobs to the EU 27, you're finding that it's the women who are being impacted the greatest because they are in this vulnerable job. And, you know, we know that largely women, you know, are less mobile because they have all the other responsibilities and infrastructure. So they do again get disproportionately affected. And, you know, the fight for getting equal pay and equality was hard fought, and it was across all sectors when we were in the European Parliament. And I think it's important that we really try and look at the impact of Brexit on women, that it will not impact all women equally. And it's important that the policies that come out of this conference and, you know, and policy forums following this really try and address it, so we don't have a blanket thing. It's saying women are impacted by Brexit. Women will be impacted at different levels in different areas of work. So, you know, it saddens me. I mean, in one way, I'm heartened that only 49% less women voted to leave the EU than men. But I think it saddens me that, you know, there were still half the women who voted to leave because they felt their social status was being compromised in one way or another. But thank you for asking me, and you know, I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Neena. That was very powerful and a real reminder. And for those of us who've been on the doorstep in both the referendum and elections since, it's been very clear what Brexit has unleashed on the doorstep, and it's not something I ever expected to hear in this country. Very, very disappointing. So we are pushing on for time, so I'm going to ask our panelists, please do try and stick to the 6 minutes if you can. But I'm delighted next up to introduce Julie Ward. Julie is former MEP, and she was on the Committee for Women's Rights and Gender Equality, so she's got a huge amount to share with us, and I just need to again unmute, and hopefully she will be ready to go. Over to you, Julie. Thank you.
Yeah,
6 minutes if we can.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, my colleagues have already talked about a lot of the legal issues. I want to say that I was very proud to represent the Party of European Socialists FEM members twice at UNCSW, which is the coming together that Jackie talked about, where we could actually shape a global position about the rights of women. And working really closely with PES Women, it was very clear that we were very successful in being extremely progressive within the EU institutions. And of course, Helena Dalli, who is a former Minister for European Affairs from Malta, is currently the Commissioner for Equalities. And I think that means that equalities are going to, equal opportunities and equalities are going to be even more on the agenda in the coming years for the EU, and we're going to fall behind because we don't have that kind of champion in a position of power here in the UK. What we have got is a Prime Minister who's a racist, homophobe, Islamophobe, misogynist, right? He's on record. You only have to Google him to find out about all the horrendous things that he said about women and people of colour and people who are LGBTI. And I think that should ring alarm bells for everybody. And with Dominic Cummings being his unelected advisor in number 10, basically trying to get rid of the civil service and to make it and to politicize it, we're in even deeper trouble. And I learned yesterday that the Government Equalities Centre has been moved to the Cabinet Office, and that most of its experts who had been there for some years and could be trusted upon to push forward the agendas of equality are no longer there. Now, I heard that information from Margaret Owen, who's a human rights barrister, who's a friend of mine. So that's hot off the press, and I think everybody should be concerned about that. The Charter of Fundamental Rights is a really fantastic document that draws together all the best possible kinds of rights safeguards that we could have. So coming out of that, which we didn't need to do, is very, very worrying. We won't be, not only are we out of that, but we're out of the European Disability Strategy, we're out of the European Roma strategy. There's a whole load of strategies. There's a mental health strategy for the EU, and we're not in any of that anymore. So our government is not participating in sharing best practice, and in, you know, and we were so much a part of that, so much a part of giving good ideas and promoting the strongest possible safeguards and mechanisms. We voted last year in the European Parliament for the UN binding mechanism for human rights in trade agreements. Well, we know that this government's absolutely desperate for trade, and they're going to be doing trade with some of the most despotic regimes around the world, like Saudi Arabia. You know, Turkey's another one. We've got a couple of things in common with Belarus. One is that it's the only other country in Europe that still uses first past the post. So I want to put in a big plea here. Let's change the voting system, folks, and let's get PR on the Labour agenda. But also we have a great interest with Belarus in terms of trade there. And I don't hold out any hope that our government will put human rights first. And we have to care about all human rights, not just the rights of people here in the UK, but human rights globally. In the Party of European Socialists, in the FEM committee, we used intersectionality as the basis for our policy making. And that meant that we always took account of multiple discrimination. And so recognizing that, you know, black women are more discriminated against than white women, and that black LGBT women, you know, black lesbian women would again be more discriminated against. And if you live in a rural area, then that increases that discrimination. That for me was a very powerful way of working and recognizing the multiple discriminations that people have. Now, I've been working with Britain in Europe, which is a think tank at Goldsmiths University, and we've just done a policy briefing on the immigration bill. And it's very, very clear that the immigration bill is not fit for purpose, that it's so ambiguous, it's going to completely politicise the issue. And the people who are going to be affected most by this bill are migrant women, refugee women, trafficked women, undocumented women, not to mention children in complex family relationships, maybe with a partner, with one parent in an EU country and one parent here in the UK. And then maybe finally just about loss of European social funds and ERDF funds. So that means already we've seen that austerity has meant shutting down women's aid and refuge centres. Legal aid is under attack. The only UK FGM centre, which was best practice example for the whole of the EU, that is going to lose its funding. Women in rural areas will suffer. Older women who are already suffering from delayed pension rights will suffer. And also self-employed women, because ERDF, which was the business bit of the regional development funding, often supported women who wanted to set up as self-employed. So I'll finish there.
Thank you, Julie. That was fascinating, and a huge amount of detail there. And again, I think it'd be great. I know that people are having some issues with sound, so we'll try and do some kind of transcript afterwards as well, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff here that needs capturing. And for me, it just shows the scale of the implications here that I just don't think people out there have grasped. So thank you, Julie, for that fantastic Oh, like Jackie's just pitching, but it's all in that book. So link us to that. Thank you. So finally, I'm really delighted to introduce my dear friend, Rupa. Rupa has been MP for Ealing Central and Acton since 2015, and she's also been a fantastic voice for the EU and for the battle that we've fought over the last few years to keep Britain's place in the world. She was formerly a lecturer in sociology at Kingston University, but is a terrific MP, and we're delighted to have her with us today. So Rupa, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. And can I also say, I really miss you. This week, you've set the agenda again. Anna is sort of modest about her achievements, but that photo of Jacob Rees-Mogg lounging across the benches was hers. And this week, she's done it again. The one of Boris Johnson spluttering and gibbering that's gone viral. Sorry, should you not say that in the global pandemic? Anyway, we all know that photo. That was Anna who took that. So it's good to see everyone. It's so many. I feel my life is flashing past me. Neena Gill, I first knew in the 90s. She's been a constituent of mine. We've been in the same CLP. Theresa Griffin, we stood together. In fact, originally I wanted to be an MEP. I didn't get selected for the 2014 European elections, and this was a kind of consolation prize. People said, you know, there's a general election as well. So weird how these things turn out. Actually, I first came into touch with European institutions. I used to work for Carol Tongue, the Tongue job, and she actually later went off to TIG. I hope she's coming back to Labour. But anyway, a lot of strong Labour women sort of influenced me in life. And I'll be brief because I think sort of everything's been said by all the brilliant speakers we've had. But I do think that you can situate the position of women in Brexit in a sort of bunch of three things, three big shocks that we've had. The position of women in austerity, and particularly after the big crash of 2008. And then now this very weird 2020 that we've all been having, you know, reboot 2020, it's got a virus in it. The coronavirus impact that we have seen disproportionately hits women. So all of these three things, and I think of the three, Brexit is probably the most self-inflicted that, you know, we could have done something about, and maybe one day we will have a chance to reverse it at some stage. Although, you know, the way the general election went, I mean, I'm from a 70% Remain seat. Even I have to accept that, you know, we have to read the room. We can't go around saying second referendum anymore and rejoin, probably not for another 10 years, I would say. I mean, just the main point I wanted to make, and people have made very well the arguments about legal protections that we're losing, hard-fought protections under the law that are being now sacrificed under the altar of populism, this whole get Brexit done. They've got a new phrase now. I think it's check, change, go. Has anyone heard that one? That's the worst one yet. It's meant to be for businesses to prepare themselves. But this sort of 3-word mantra that they seem to have got themselves in a habit of. So people have talked about that quite a lot. I just want to say that I think women have been very invisible throughout this whole thing. So the public faces of the Leave campaign were people like Jacob Rees-Mogg and our dear Prime Minister. Ollie Robbins, the original EU negotiator, who was a career civil servant and diplomat. That was not Olivia Robbins. You know, well, men in suits we see. Barnier, the new guy, Sir David Frost. I'm now on the Brexit Select Committee, actually. And again, how things change. This year we've seen lots of things that used to be good are now considered bad. Public transport was always a green thing. Now it's a death trap. So the last time round, the Brexit Select Committee was super sought and fought over, and it was a contested thing. This year, sort of nobody really wanted to be on it, and it's a temporary committee for a year. I'm on that one. We've had Ollie Robbins come and speak. It's like Rod Hull and Emu. He doesn't come on his own. He comes with Gove, and he's not allowed to say anything unless Gove pretty much unmutes him, really. So, I mean, and I think you have better decision making when women are involved, because, you know, sometimes the mum at the school gates knows better than the man at the ministry, and too much of our decision making is sort of blokes in suits, all that stuff, and it doesn't take into account women's positions are sort of quite unique. So people have talked about, Neena talked about the care sector. We know that social care, we know that with the demographic time bomb coming down the track, that's the biggest item of single expenditure for any local authority with our ageing population. A lot of people in that sector are EU nationals, the fact they feel unwelcome, NHS nurses, all those things. A lot of women like me, I guess, are in a sandwich generation. So we have unpaid caring responsibilities at both ends. And actually, I don't have any parents anymore, but for a long time, yeah, when they were ailing, you're on mum watch, dad watch, and then at the other end you've got to take kids to football on a Saturday. I've moved some stuff around to be here today. So we know that the EU gave us a lot of protections, and again, when you debate this with Tories, they say the 1970 Equal Pay Act happened before all this. Well, yes, it was a piece of homegrown legislation from a Labour government, but it was strengthened and furthered by our EU membership. And we don't really have any minimum standards. They've said they've translated everything into law in the Withdrawal Act, but what about stuff in the future? And, you know, we just don't trust this lot, do we? We just don't know what they'll do. In my lifetime, I remember the 1984 European election. I was at school, and the adverts in the papers that the Tories took out said, "Don't let in Kinnock by the back door." And the polling found people quite liked the idea. I think they were very unpopular that year, and it's the first national election we won for ages, and it looked like we might be able to do it in a general election. So in my lifetime, it felt like anything good that ever happened came from Europe by the back door, or whatever you call it. When you'd go to Labour conferences when we were in power, if you remember at the beginning, there'd be a curtain and they would project on Labour achievements, free piece of fruit in every school, you know, these kind of things. But a lot of them, paid holiday, maternity protections, paternity pay, a lot of those came from Europe that we were claiming as our own. So yeah, for me, it's a thing of mourning, really, that we have left now. I have to get used to saying that we've left. It was Harriet Harman, wasn't it, who said that if it had been the Lehman sisters, not the Lehman brothers, we wouldn't have had that almighty crash in 2008. So women's rights seem to be expendable in all this. Women seem to be invisible in the process. And, you know, we need to change that. The Women's Budget Group have done good work on this. Consumer protections people have talked about. You know, women are the people most likely to have to prepare that hormone-injected beef and chlorine-pumped chicken that's coming our way. And, you know, people are saying it may be back to the 70s. It could be back to the 50s, you know, even worse than that, all that sort of, hi, honey, I'm home stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I think all those rights, sexuality, disability, ethnicity, gender rights are at threat here. And I think, you know, the person who made most sense on this was Danny Dyer when he talked about the mad riddle of Brexit. We still not completely solved that. So, I mean, just really what I want to say is, you know, we shouldn't take their word for it. We're at a very dangerous crossroads now. The fact that we could be heading to, if you say no deal, they always say, no, we've got his great deal, no trade deal. That's a real, it's a real possibility at the moment. And this whole stuff we've seen with the internal markets bill, we don't know if it's a double, triple bluff that they're doing this on purpose as a negotiating tactic, but it's a super dangerous road to go down. And, you know, we should always be suspicious of words like flexibility and cutting red tape, because that is code for race to the bottom and erasing women's rights. So, I mean, I don't know where I am in the 6 minutes. I'm not looking at, just,
sorry.
Yeah. Okay, I've gone over. All right, I'll stop there. Everything else will come out.
That would be great.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
look,
sure. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Okay,
I'm just, we're lucky enough.
Yeah, and we've got some time.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Exactly. So we were due to end at 2:30, but there's no one in this kind of virtual space after us, so I'm going to go on for an extra 15 minutes if that's all right, because due to my appalling chairing we have overrun. So thank you, Rupa, for that. That was fantastic. So what I'll ask people to do is, if I can read out this explanation of how you ask a question. So basically, to virtually raise your hand, you have to click participants and then click the button labelled raise hand, which is on the right side of the screen. And then that will automatically list them to me, and I'll go through the participants, unmute you, and you can ask your question. And I'll try and take as many sort of groups as I can, so that we can get it done in the next 15 minutes. So apologies for overrunning, but do raise your hand if you'd like to participate and ask a question to our superb panel. Let's see if the technology allows this. Great, we've got one. I'll hang on for a little bit longer. Well, actually, yeah, here we go. They're rolling in now. So I'll ask you, Geeta. It says to me, allow to talk is not available because Geeta Patel is using an older version of Zoom. Choose promote to panelist. Here we go. So Geeta, this will hopefully work for you. I've made you an honorary panelist for a few minutes. Can you hear me? Can you hear us, Geeta? Oh dear. Right, I think I might have to ask for some assistance. Harry, can you assist me on this?
Yeah, I think while I try and sort that out, if people just put their questions in the chat bar for now.
Okay. All the best laid plans. Yeah. Here we go. I've got Deborah. Let me see. Deborah Hopkins. Deborah Hopkins, can you hear us? Are you able to speak?
I've just made her a panelist, and it says she's rejoining.
With the joys of technology. It's so much easier if we were in a room together. Deborah, I can see your question in the question and open session. So are you able to read it out? Right, well, I'll read Deborah's question. So panel, if you could hear this question and prepare an answer, and I'll do it on Deborah's behalf, and I'm sorry that we're not able to hear from her. Deborah says, I'm in Cornwall where the vote went Brexit, but where women are the lowest paid in the poorest place in North Europe. We're facing catastrophic damage here where poverty is already shocking. How can we protect women from the loss of legal protection in work and in all other trade and social and health access impacts? So if you start thinking about that, and hopefully Geeta has also put her question down, even though we couldn't get her to speak either. So I'll read out Geeta's question. Geeta said, she's mentioned, first of all, free impartial advice from Citizens Advice. They finance across the country to provide legal advice to individuals and collectives of women to challenge discrimination, which is great. And she says, how can we better influence at UK level as EU level is not an option anymore? So that's the second question from Geeta, and I'll take this third question from an anonymous attendee. How may women asylum seekers and refugees be affected by Brexit? So that's the first three questions, and I think I'll try and get some of the Over to the panel, and I will just try and unmute so you can answer.
I'm quite happy to just take up Geeta's point about influencing. I think it's really important that we keep the debate going, and I don't feel, let's say, so negative in terms of influencing the European debate. As I said, our colleagues in the Party of European Socialists, in Progressive Alliance, which Labour is a member of, are very keen to hear British voices, and we want to continue to make those. And I think, you know, there will be virtually many colleagues from the EU 27 and elsewhere who will be, you know, present and listening to our debates to hear what our thoughts are. But within the UK itself, I think there is a little danger that people think, oh, well, Brexit is done, let's park it, let's move on to the next areas. But I think the points that are being raised, you know, in terms from Deborah and what happens to women and how they're impacted in deepest Cornwall and elsewhere, have to be on Labour's agenda. And I know very many colleagues like Rupa and Tulip, you know, in the House of Commons are raising those. But I think, you know, we need all of you who are listening to this debate to be raising some of these issues in other debates that are taking place, these virtual debates. So it's not just confined to LME and a European debate. So people are saying, okay, if we're discussing policy about low pay, let's put in the Brexit factor and the impact it will have on the farming, agricultural community in X, Y, and Z. So I would urge, you know, those who are here that they raise Brexit-related concerns and push it higher up on the agenda of our front bench team, so that they have got really informed examples that they can move forward with.
Thank you, Neena. That's brilliant. Great. And Rupa, I'd like to bring you in next, and I'd like to add the question that we've had from Saima Afzal as well to those other three. And she's asked a question about multiple discrimination. How do we deal with that? And that it's not just sexism, but with, you know, different issues around, you know, different forms of discrimination that are often multi-layered. So I wondered if you wanted to bring that one in as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're all often in a complex Venn diagram. We are many things, as well as being women. You know, I'm visibly BME. I mean, I think part of it is to sort of not become Uncle Tom and do things on their turf. So actually, the polling has shown that BME people were not all massive Remainers. And there is this, I can cite it from my own family, sense of pull up the ladder behind you if you've, you know, there's even a hierarchy of different immigrants, even within different minority communities. So I have the most Polish constituency in the UK, but that's not just 2004 expansion people. Neena knows Ealing well. There's been Polish since, there's a Polish war memorial in our borough, goodness, since sort of intellectuals fled. And there's often a hierarchy that the intellectual ones say, we're not the plumber and plasterer ones. And I think there needs to be more of a sense of sort of solidarity and even, heck, I used to be a sociologist, class as well, class consciousness is a good thing. So, you know, the person working in the industrial estate in Park Royal in my seat has more in common with someone on the production line at the Fiat factory in Turin than they do with, do you know what I mean? So it's not necessarily, yeah, sort of where you're located. So I think those kind of things, and it's very disappointing. People like Priti Patel, our current Home Secretary, led this campaign that was hashtag Save Our Curry, but these sort of evil European immigration laws have meant it's difficult to get curry chefs. Once we had left, I remember asking in Home Office questions, and I was a front bencher for a bit, where are these curry chefs? When are they coming? When are we changing our immigration laws? And it was a completely bogus thing. So I think pitting people against people is a bad idea. yeah, more class consciousness is my...
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Rupa. Thank you. And Julie, can I bring you in either to answer some of those questions, but we've also had a further one from Joyce, who was asked about the impact on the Roma community. Many came over here from Europe to be protected. How are they going to suffer after Brexit? They've already had, you know, terrible backgrounds in institutional racism around various countries. And what will they expect now in post-Brexit Britain?
Okay.
It's a combination of any.
Yeah, okay. First of all, just talk about multiple discrimination, which Rupa just picked up on there. But one of the things that we have to demonstrate is that diverse societies are actually the most successful. It's in our interests economically to have a diverse society. And we need as a party to be making that case much more clearly. I would, you know, and I would like to see the party just generally embracing intersectionality as a policy device more, and using things like the European Institute for Gender Equality, you know, which is a fantastic research institute based in Lithuania that was gathering together all that information. So I think that, and we've got brilliant organisations here in this country like Fawcett Society, like Women's Budget Group, who are doing really fantastic work. So I think we've just got to gather all that, you know, all that research, that body of research together and do something with it. And it needs to make sense, you know, it needs to make sense to a busy woman who's doing lots and lots of jobs. It needs to be very, very understandable from their perspective in terms of paying the bills, paying the mortgage, getting the kids to school, you know, am I going to get my pension? It's like those real kind of things.
Thank you.
So if I can just say something about better advocating at EU level. All Labour women are members of PES Women, and both Jackie and I have been very active in PES Women, and you know, everybody here could be as active as we are, but our own party doesn't really promote PES and our membership of PES enough, or even membership for young Labour members. And I think that we've just got to champion that more. We've got to create many more opportunities. So it was, and there's also European Parliament in UK, which used to be our office here in London, in St John Smith Square. That's now become, if you like, a third country embassy. They are still doing really amazing events about trade and all sorts of things. And Bernard Lang, who is he's one of our colleagues on the Trade Committee, he has spoken at a couple of seminars. So I think, you know, there are organisations based here that are doing, you know, which still create pathways for us to have that conversation.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, thank you. And if I could just do a plug for LME, we're going to be looking to do more with PES, because I think the shared agenda that we have, and we could be a conduit to stay in touch with our friends and fellow socialists and social democrats across Europe. So we certainly intend to do more on that. I'm going to come to Jackie next, and then to Theresa, just to say a few more sort of concluding responses to the questions that we've had. So Jackie, over to you.
Sure, thank you. There's been a few questions about me saying women don't use law enough, and what I mean by that is that we could use it more and in different ways. And someone made the comment, I can't remember now who, about it doesn't have to be going to litigation, it can be other things as well. So law is a first step. And why I think that's important is because we are facing a no deal, and the internal market bill and the announcement of we're breaching international law means that all of this is on the table, and it's under threat. And judicial review is under threat. Employment tribunals, that's really difficult to take a case. And I'm very much in favour of reforming the equalities laws. Of course, not now at the moment with this government. But I don't know if anyone knows, well, I'm sure some people know, but the immigration tribunals are not having any hearings at the moment at all, none at all. So this is really, really problematic for access to justice. Using law means bringing a lot of people together. We've got to organise and have an effective opposition. I don't mean MP level, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about individuals banding together, who don't normally come together and pushing for their rights. Otherwise, they're going to be gone.
Thank you.
That's what I meant. Thank you.
Absolutely right, Jackie. That's very powerful. Thank you. And finally, Theresa, if you would like to respond to the questions we've received.
Yes, thank you. And firstly, Anna, can I say how sorely you're missed, and the work that you did in terms of jobs and workers' rights, not only in your constituency, but with the Trade Union Intergroup in the European Parliament. And actually those relationships were really important. So as you said, if LME and Emily in her work can continue those relationships, they want us to be able to influence. And Rupa, what fun we had when we were both candidates for the European elections in the Northwest. It was great. I miss you, sister. To come back to Deborah's question right at the beginning, the difference about European finance, the structural funds, be that training funds or regional infrastructure funds, was they were based on socio-economic need. They weren't based on putting finances where your friends are in power, which is why Cornwall, Merseyside and the Highlands and Islands of Scotland in the mid-80s got Objective 1 status, which is the highest amount of finance you could receive from Europe. And we only have to look at the transformational change that happened. I am deeply concerned about the fact that we don't know adequately how those structural funds are going to be replaced in our poorest communities and our poorest regions. And I know the Labour Party will fight for that to happen. And the last thing to say really is why we got the energy poverty legislation through the European Parliament is because we could tell stories. And the stories that we have as women from our everyday lives can influence policy, and as Jackie said, can influence law. And the reason we got energy poverty on the agenda was when I was privileged to be a counsellor in Liverpool. A young woman came to my surgery. She was a single mum with 3 kids, and she had been disconnected from her energy supply. That shouldn't happen to any family anywhere again, and we've got to make sure that we interpolate, that's a strange word, that we enshrine that also in our manifestos as Labour women, so it can't happen again. So every single one of us is powerful from our everyday lives. I think that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a fantastic message to end on. You know, we all have a role to play. We can all keep pushing for our values and for solidarity with women across borders, from our CLPs to our workplaces and to our online presence as well. So I want to say a huge thank you to our fantastic panel. I've learned a lot today in a very short space of time, and it's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you to all of you for participating. I'm really sorry about the sound issues. I don't know whether that's because of the kind of the crush of the Labour conference weekend or whether it's individual broadband issues. I know I've had a few concerns, so sorry about that, but thank you for your questions and your participation. We would love to have you, if you're not already a member of the Labour Movement for Europe, please do join. Harry's putting the details in the box. Get your friends to join. Create your CLP to us if you can. We'd love to work more closely with you. And just to let you know, we've also got 3 more webinars over the coming days of conference.